When we give pieces of ourselves freely, our time, our trust, our kindness, believing they will be held with the same care in return. Yet not every hand that reaches toward us is meant to hold us, and not every presence in our lives is meant to nurture our becoming. Too often, we find ourselves pouring into people who cannot or will not pour back, slowly realizing that what we offered so generously was met with indifference, inconsistency, or quiet disregard. In those moments, we begin to understand a profound truth. Our energy is sacred, our attention is valuable, and our hearts deserve to be placed where they are recognized, respected, and reciprocated. This is not a lesson of closing ourselves off from the world, but rather of opening our eyes to see clearly, to choose wisely, to love ourselves enough to walk away when something diminishes us, and to stand firm in the quiet power of knowing that we are worthy of relationships that do not require us to shrink, question our value, or fight to be seen. Knowing your worth is not a moment of pride. It is a lifelong practice of remembrance. It is the quiet understanding that your presence carries weight, your voice carries meaning, and your energy is not something to be scattered in places that cannot honor it. When you recognize your own value, you begin to move differently through the world. You no longer rush to prove yourself where you are not appreciated, nor do you shrink your light to make others comfortable. Instead, you stand in the fullness of who you are, aware that your time, your attention, and your emotional investment are not gifts to be given without care. They are extensions of your spirit, and they deserve to be placed where they will be met with sincerity, respect, and truth. There is a subtle danger in giving too much of yourself to the wrong people. At first, it may feel like generosity, like openness, like love freely expressed. But over time, without balance or reciprocity, it can become a quiet erosion of your inner strength. You begin to notice the small signs, the missed efforts, the unreturned care, the one-sided understanding, and yet you remain, hoping that what you offer will eventually be recognized. In these moments, knowing your worth becomes your anchor. It reminds you that your value is not determined by how others respond to you, but by the inherent dignity you carry within yourself. When you hold on to this truth, you begin to see that not every connection deserves your full investment, and not every person is aligned with the depth you bring. To know your worth is also to accept that walking away is not a failure, but a form of self-respect. It takes strength to release what no longer serves your growth, especially when emotions are involved and memories have been formed. Yet, there is a deeper wisdom in choosing yourself over a connection that diminishes you. In doing so, you are not rejecting others out of bitterness. You are honoring the part of you that refuses to be depleted. You begin to understand that your energy is not meant to be drained in places where it is not replenished, but to be shared where it is valued, where it is met with equal intention and care. In the end, knowing your worth before sharing your energy is not about withdrawing from life, but about engaging with it more consciously. It is about recognizing that you are a lasting force, not a temporary convenience. When you carry this awareness, you no longer give yourself away in fragments to those who cannot hold you fully. Instead, you offer yourself where there is alignment, where there is mutual respect, and where your presence is not questioned but cherished. And in doing so, you protect not only your energy, but the integrity of your spirit. Not every smile that meets you carries sincerity, and not every warm greeting is rooted in genuine intention. There are those who will walk beside you for a season, offering laughter that feels familiar and words that sound comforting, yet their presence may not be anchored in loyalty or truth. A smile can be an invitation, but it can also be a mask, and wisdom teaches you to look beyond what is easily shown. Discernment asks you to observe quietly, to listen not only to what is said, but to what is consistently done, for character reveals itself in patterns rather than promises. In learning this, you begin to understand that connection is not measured by fleeting gestures, but by the depth of integrity that stands behind them. To move through the world with discernment is to accept that your heart must not be placed in the care of appearances alone. It is tempting to trust quickly, to believe in the comfort of friendliness, and to interpret kindness as commitment. Yet experience gently teaches that some who smile in your presence may not stand with you when silence falls or when challenges arise. Their presence may be light in moments of ease, but absence becomes evident when strength is required. In recognizing this, you are not becoming guarded out of fear. You are becoming aware out of respect for your own emotional well-being. You begin to see that true companionship reveals itself not in how someone presents themselves during moments of ease, but in how they remain when life becomes uncertain. Discernment, though quiet, is a profound act of self-respect because it requires you to pause before you invest, to observe before you attach, and to reflect before you trust completely. It is the voice within that urges you not to ignore inconsistencies, not to overlook repeated patterns, and not to confuse charm with character. When you honor that voice, you protect yourself from disappointment that comes from misplaced expectations. You allow relationships to unfold naturally, giving time the space to reveal what is genuine and what is not. In doing so, you free yourself from the burden of proving your value to those who were never prepared to recognize it. There is strength in understanding that not every smile is a promise, and not every friendly face is meant to become part of your foundation. When you embrace discernment, you begin to choose your circle with intention rather than impulse. You surround yourself with those whose actions align with their words, whose presence brings consistency rather than confusion, and whose loyalty does not waver when circumstances change. In this awareness, you find peace because you are no longer investing your trust blindly, but wisely. And in that wisdom lies a quiet dignity, a steady confidence that allows you to stand firmly in who you are without needing to question where you belong or who truly stands beside you. Promises can sound beautiful in the moment, carrying the warmth of intention and the comfort of possibility, yet they are only as meaningful as the actions that follow them. Words may be carefully chosen, delivered with confidence and even sincerity, but time has a quiet way of revealing what words alone cannot sustain. When you begin to pay attention to consistency, you shift your focus from what is said to what is lived. You start to notice whether effort remains steady or fades, whether presence is reliable or occasional, whether care is demonstrated repeatedly or offered only when convenient. In this awareness, you learn that truth is not found in isolated moments of charm, but in the patterns that unfold across days, weeks, and seasons. Consistency is a language of its own, one that does not require persuasion or embellishment. It shows itself in the small, often overlooked details, showing up when it is not easy, keeping commitments without reminders, and maintaining respect even when circumstances are challenging. These quiet acts build trust far more deeply than promises ever could. When someone is consistent, you do not have to question where you stand, because their behavior provides clarity without confusion. There is a steadiness in their presence that allows you to relax into the relationship without constantly seeking reassurance or decoding intentions. When you fail to observe consistency, you may find yourself caught in cycles of hope and disappointment. A promise gives rise to expectation, and when that expectation is not met, it can lead to confusion, doubt, and emotional strain. Over time, this pattern can cause you to question your own judgment, to second-guess your perceptions, and to remain attached to the idea of what could be rather than accepting what is. By turning your attention to consistency, you reclaim your clarity. You begin to evaluate people not by what they say in isolated moments, but by how they show up repeatedly in your life. There is a quiet strength in choosing consistency as your measure of truth. It requires patience, restraint, and the willingness to observe without rushing to conclusions. It also requires honesty with yourself, acknowledging when someone's actions do not align with their words, and being brave enough to accept that misalignment without forcing it into harmony. In doing so, you protect your energy from being invested in uncertainty, and you create space for relationships that are grounded in reliability rather than illusion. Over time, this practice reshapes the way you connect with others. You become less impressed by grand declarations and more attuned to steady behavior. You value those who demonstrate their intentions through action, who remain present not just in moments of convenience, but in moments that require effort and care. In this shift, your relationships become more stable, your expectations more realistic, and your emotional well-being more secure. And in choosing consistency over promises, you align yourself with truth that can be trusted, not just spoken. There is a subtle but unmistakable feeling that arises when a connection is not meant for your growth. It does not always announce itself loudly or arrive with clear warnings. Instead, it reveals itself through a gradual sense of exhaustion that settles in your spirit. You may find that after spending time with certain individuals, your energy feels diminished rather than uplifted, your thoughts become heavier rather than clearer, and your sense of self begins to feel slightly less certain than before. This is not coincidence, but a reflection of imbalance, an indication that what you are giving is not being met with something that restores you in return. In healthy connections, there is a natural exchange that leaves both individuals strengthened, encouraged, and more aligned with who they are becoming. Growth in relationships is not always loud or dramatic. It is often quiet, steady, and deeply affirming. The right people do not compete with your light, nor do they require you to suppress your voice to maintain harmony. Instead, they create an environment where you feel safe to express yourself fully, where your ideas are received with respect, and where your presence is valued without condition. In such spaces, you are not constantly questioning your worth or adjusting your behavior to gain acceptance. You are allowed to exist as you are, and in that acceptance, you are encouraged to evolve naturally. These connections act as nourishment, feeding your confidence, reinforcing your clarity, and supporting your emotional well-being in ways that feel balanced and genuine. In contrast, relationships that are misaligned often leave you feeling depleted because they demand more than they contribute. You may find yourself giving attention, understanding, patience, and emotional energy without receiving the same level of care in return. Over time, this imbalance can create a quiet sense of emptiness, as though something within you is being gradually worn down. It is not always easy to recognize this at first, especially when attachment and familiarity are involved. However, when you begin to pay attention to how you feel after interactions, whether you feel lighter or heavier, encouraged or drained, you start to gather important insight into the nature of those connections. Choosing to acknowledge when a relationship is draining rather than nurturing is an act of honesty with yourself. It requires you to confront the possibility that not every bond is meant to last, and not every person is aligned with your growth. This realization is not meant to create distance from others out of fear, but to guide you toward connections that support your well-being. When you make space for those who contribute positively to your life, you allow yourself to be surrounded by influences that uplift rather than diminish you. In doing so, you create an environment where your energy is preserved, your spirit is strengthened, and your growth is not hindered, but encouraged in a way that feels natural and sustaining. Silence carries a truth that words often attempt to disguise. In moments of ease, when everything flows smoothly and expectations are low, it is simple for people to speak kindly, to offer reassurance, and to present themselves in ways that feel supportive and genuine. Yet it is in the quieter, more challenging moments, when presence requires effort, when comfort is not convenient, and when action is needed more than expression, that the reality of a person's character begins to surface. Silence, in these instances, is not empty. It is revealing. It exposes what words alone cannot sustain, showing you whether someone's care is consistent or merely conditional. When you observe how someone responds in moments where you need support, clarity replaces assumption. A person who truly values your presence will not rely solely on comforting language. They will demonstrate their intention through action, through showing up, through remaining engaged when it matters most. Their silence will not leave you feeling uncertain or unseen, because their behavior has already communicated reliability. On the other hand, when silence is accompanied by absence, neglect, or withdrawal during times of need, it becomes a reflection of priorities. It shows you, without embellishment, where you stand in their world. There is a quiet power in recognizing that silence can be more honest than speech. Words can be shaped, repeated, and even rehearsed, but silence cannot be fabricated in the same way. It exists naturally, revealing patterns that are otherwise hidden beneath layers of expression. When someone consistently withdraws, avoids, or fails to engage during meaningful moments, their silence speaks to a lack of alignment rather than a lack of opportunity. In contrast, those who step forward when it is not easy to do so demonstrate a depth of commitment that words alone cannot fully capture. Learning to interpret silence requires patience and attentiveness. It asks you to look beyond what is promised and to consider what is practiced. In doing so, you begin to understand that true connection is not measured by how well someone communicates in comfortable settings, but by how they respond when circumstances demand presence, effort, and sincerity. Silence, in this sense, becomes a guide, gently directing your awareness toward what is real and away from what is merely expressed. Over time, this understanding reshapes the way you trust and invest in others. You become less influenced by polished words and more grounded in observable actions. You no longer fill silence with assumptions or justify the absence of effort with excuses that overlook reality. Instead, you allow silence to speak for itself, recognizing that it often carries the clearest message of all. And in listening to it carefully, you protect your energy from being placed where it is not reciprocated, choosing instead to align yourself with those whose presence remains steady, not only in words, but in the moments that truly define connection. There is a quiet dignity in understanding that attention and respect are not prizes to be earned through pleading, nor are they rewards to be chased through endless effort to be seen. When you begin to find yourself reaching, explaining, repeating, or proving your worth to those who consistently overlook it, something within you starts to weaken. It is not because you lack value, but because you are placing that value in the hands of those who have not chosen to recognize it. Respect that must be demanded repeatedly, or attention that must be begged for continuously, loses its meaning in the process, leaving you drained in the very act of trying to secure it. True recognition does not require persuasion. It arrives naturally, without force, because the right people are attentive enough to see you and considerate enough to acknowledge you without being prompted. They do not require constant reminders of your presence, nor do they need convincing to treat you with basic regard. Their awareness of your worth is reflected in how they listen, how they respond, and how they include you in their thoughts and actions. In their company, you do not feel the need to perform or diminish yourself. You are received as you are, without conditions attached to your expression. When attention and respect are genuine, they are consistent and freely given. There is no imbalance that leaves you questioning your place or striving to maintain your position through effort alone. Instead, there is a sense of ease, where communication flows without strain, and where mutual regard is evident without being questioned. In such relationships, you are not measuring your significance by how much you have to do to be acknowledged, because acknowledgement is already present in the way you are treated. Releasing the need to beg for attention or respect is an act of self-restraint and inner clarity. It requires you to step back from environments where your presence is not naturally valued, and to accept that not every space is meant to hold your energy. This realization may initially feel uncomfortable, especially when familiarity or emotional attachment is involved. However, remaining in spaces where you must continually prove your worth can slowly erode your sense of self, leading you to accept less than what you deserve, simply to avoid the discomfort of letting go. There is strength in choosing to withdraw from situations where recognition is not given freely. In doing so, you affirm that your value does not depend on external validation that must be pursued or negotiated. You begin to align yourself with people who meet you with awareness rather than indifference, who offer respect without hesitation, and who understand your worth without requiring explanation. In that alignment, you no longer feel the need to convince others to see you, because you have already chosen to see yourself clearly, and that understanding becomes the foundation upon which you stand. Protecting your emotional investment is not an act of withholding love, but an act of honoring the depth of it. The heart is not meant to be scattered carelessly across places that cannot hold it with responsibility and care. When you give your trust, your time, and your emotional energy, you are offering something profoundly valuable, something that cannot be reclaimed in the same form once it has been spent. For this reason, it becomes essential to be mindful of where your heart is placed, ensuring that it rests in spaces where it is met with sincerity, consistency, and mutual regard. An emotional investment should feel like a shared responsibility, not a one-sided effort that leaves you carrying the weight alone. There are relationships that ask for your understanding but rarely extend the same in return. They may receive your patience without offering clarity, accept your care without reciprocating effort, and rely on your presence without acknowledging its significance. Over time, this imbalance can create an inner conflict where you begin to question whether giving more will eventually lead to being valued more. Yet, emotional investment does not grow in worth through excess giving to those who do not recognize its value. Instead, it diminishes your inner reserves, leaving you stretched thin and quietly depleted. In such moments, the most important question is not how much more you can give, but whether what you are receiving justifies what you are offering. Mutual care is the foundation that sustains emotional well-being in any meaningful connection. It is reflected in small but consistent actions, checking in without being asked, listening with genuine attention, offering support without keeping score. When care is mutual, there is a balance that allows both individuals to feel seen and supported without the constant need to compensate for absence or neglect. This balance creates a sense of safety where you are not second-guessing your place or questioning your importance, because it is naturally affirmed through the way you are treated. To protect your emotional investment is to set quiet boundaries that guide how much of yourself you share and with whom. It does not mean closing your heart, but rather opening it with awareness. It means observing how others respond to your presence over time, recognizing patterns, and allowing those patterns to inform your decisions. When care is not reciprocated, protecting your emotional investment may require stepping back, not out of resentment, but out of respect for your own well-being. In doing so, you preserve your capacity to love fully, while ensuring that your energy is directed toward connections that honor and sustain you. In the end, emotional investment should feel like a space where both individuals contribute, grow, and support one another in ways that are balanced and genuine. When you choose to place your heart where mutual care exists, you create room for relationships that do not drain you, but instead reinforce your strength, your clarity, and your sense of self. There are connections that do not ask you to grow into your fullest self, but instead subtly encourage you to become smaller, quieter, and less certain of who you are. At first, the request may not be spoken directly, yet it is felt in the way your ideas are dismissed, in the way your voice is overlooked, or in the way your natural expression seems to create discomfort rather than acceptance. In such environments, you may begin to adjust yourself unconsciously, softening your opinions, holding back your thoughts, or filtering your personality in order to maintain a sense of peace. Over time, this quiet shrinking becomes a habit, and what once felt like adaptation slowly turns into self-suppression. When a person cannot accept your full presence, it often reflects their own limitations rather than anything lacking within you. Your growth, your confidence, and your authenticity may challenge those who are not ready to meet you at that level. Instead of rising to the occasion, they may respond by creating subtle pressures that encourage you to remain within a space that feels more comfortable for them. This is where awareness becomes essential, because not every environment that feels familiar is one that supports your becoming. Familiarity can sometimes disguise limitation, making it appear as though staying small is safer than expanding into your true potential. Letting go of such connections is not an act of rejection toward others, but an act of acceptance toward yourself. It is the recognition that you are not meant to diminish your light in order to fit into spaces that cannot hold it. Growth requires environments where your presence is not only tolerated but welcomed, where your voice is not only heard but considered, and where your authenticity is not questioned but respected. When you remain in spaces that require you to shrink, you gradually distance yourself from these conditions, making it more difficult to access the confidence and clarity that come from being fully expressed. There is courage in choosing to step away from relationships that do not align with your expansion. It is not always easy, especially when emotional ties have been formed or when memories have created a sense of attachment. Yet holding on to connections that restrict your growth often comes at the cost of your inner freedom. By releasing what confines you, you create space for relationships that allow you to stand fully in who you are without hesitation. In these spaces, you do not need to reduce your presence or question your natural expression because your growth is not seen as a threat, but as something that is understood and supported. In choosing to no longer shrink for the comfort of others, you affirm a deeper truth about yourself. You acknowledge that your presence is not meant to be limited, that your voice is not meant to be softened for approval, and that your growth is not something to be compromised. And in that acknowledgement, you begin to align your life with connections that honor your fullness, allowing you to exist, express, and evolve without restraint. Walking away is rarely a moment of noise. It is often a quiet decision made after much reflection, after repeated experiences have revealed what words once tried to conceal. It is the point where clarity replaces confusion, where acceptance replaces hope that has been stretched beyond its natural limits. To walk away is not to abandon care, nor is it to deny the value of what once existed. It is, instead, the recognition that staying in a place that no longer aligns with your peace requires a cost that your spirit should not have to pay. In that realization, you begin to understand that attachment, no matter how deep, is not a sufficient reason to remain in an environment that continuously unsettles your mind and weakens your sense of stability. Peace is often underestimated because it does not demand attention in the same way that emotional intensity does. It does not arrive with urgency or excitement, nor does it pull you into cycles of uncertainty that keep you engaged through unpredictability. Instead, peace offers something far more steady, a sense of calm that allows you to breathe without hesitation, to think without confusion, and to exist without the weight of emotional conflict. When a connection disrupts this peace repeatedly, it becomes necessary to evaluate whether the attachment you feel is supporting your growth or quietly hindering it. In doing so, you begin to see that peace is not something you find externally alone, but something you preserve internally by the choices you make. Choosing to walk away requires strength that is often invisible to others. It is not always accompanied by closure, nor is it guaranteed to be understood by those who remain within the situation. Yet the absence of external validation does not diminish the significance of the decision. In fact, it often highlights the depth of inner conviction required to prioritize your well-being over familiarity. There is a certain courage in stepping into the unknown, in releasing what is known and comfortable, and in trusting that what lies ahead will offer a more balanced and respectful environment for your energy. That courage grows from self-respect, from the understanding that your emotional stability is not something to be compromised for the sake of maintaining a connection that no longer serves you. Attachment can sometimes create the illusion that holding on is equivalent to loyalty, when in reality, loyalty to yourself is equally, if not more, important. Remaining in a place that drains you does not strengthen the bond, it weakens your foundation. Walking away, on the other hand, allows you to reclaim that foundation, to rebuild your sense of balance, and to redirect your energy toward spaces that are more aligned with your well-being. In that choice, there is no true loss, only a redirection of where your strength is invested. In the end, walking away becomes an affirmation that your peace holds greater value than any attachment that compromises it. It reflects a deeper understanding that strength is not always found in endurance, but sometimes in release. And in choosing peace over attachment, you stand firmly in your own worth, guided not by what is familiar, but by what allows you to remain whole.